Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me here. This is such a privilege to get to be your first speaker here in this new awesome space and to get to spend the afternoon with you. We're going to have a lot of fun today, and I have a few experiments up my sleeve that I'm looking forward to subjecting you to. And I also have some information that I really am hoping to share and convey to you, some of which you may already know or you might already feel like validates who you are, and some of the information which I think might challenge you or be great information to share with those of your colleagues, friends, and family members who weren't able to be here today. So I want to start off with one statement that's really beginning to challenge. It was the beginning and the genesis of what caused me to write my book on the future of happiness. And it was a statement I read that said, "Technology is the greatest disruptor of happiness in human history." Now, is that really true? We hear news from multiple different sources about how technology is the equivalent of digital heroin, how there's screen time that's eroding the fabric of our society and ruining our relationships with our grandparents. But some of this information comes from a sensationalized source. And so I wanted to delve into what is the truth about this. I come from a background in positive psychology, which is an odd place to come to technology. Most people think that technology and happiness are actually oxymorons. But I think that there's something really important to be said for the time and the place that we're living in that requires us to think a little bit more deeply about how we're living in the digital age. How can we live with greater happiness and mindfulness in the digital age? Is this even possible, or is it truly the greatest disruptor of happiness in human history? In the past 10 years, we have found that the technology has sped up so dramatically that we find ourselves overwhelmed and unprepared for the challenges that we face today. We find that since the iPhone came out in 2007, we're now about a decade out from the first iPhone, that the world has changed dramatically. We have technology that would have blown our minds 10 years ago, from FaceTime to 3D printed organs that are saving lives. And yet at the same time, we're finding that depression rates have doubled in that same period of time, that the amount of cyberbullying has gone up by 88% just in the last 5 years alone, and that the number of repetitive stress injuries for teenagers visiting the chiropractor, teenagers, has gone up by 50%. That's from a lot of this. And I think that it's interesting, and it's changing the way that we're thinking about how are we as a society evolving? What does that mean for us? Not only physiologically, but also emotionally. What is this doing to our happiness? Now, don't be alarmed. I know I'm in a tech space. I love Google, and I think that it's important to reassure you that I'm not anti-tech, that I'm also not going to tell you that you need to throw your phones out the window. I'm actually a huge fan of technology. I believe that it has so much potential, but part of my mission and my message is to help us use technology in our personal lives as well as our professional lives in a way that fosters mindfulness, in a way that elevates our emotional well-being and our happiness for the long run. Because I believe that the path that we are setting ourselves on right now, right here, today, is what's going to determine how we feel in the future and what our world looks like today. Currently, what we struggle with is an overwhelming social media feed. We have news coming from all sources. Our Twitter feed is constantly coming in. You've got emails that are probably piling up while you listen to me talk about not being stressed out by technology, and you have to go back and answer all of them. We have Netflix feeds that are now they're creating a backlog of shows that we're going to have to catch up on because they're releasing all the episodes at once. And these things begin to stress us out, even though they're things that make us happy, even though they're things that are supposed to drive our productivity. We find ourselves feeling more and more overwhelmed, frustrated, and unprepared for how to deal with the onslaught of information in our lives. So the question that I want to pose today is, can our happiness and our health keep pace with the speed of innovation? And I think that the question really comes down to a bit of self-awareness on our own part. Oftentimes we'll feel like victims of distraction, that somebody keeps texting you when you're trying to focus, that so-and-so keeps sending you messages that you don't care about, that you're getting bulk email messages or junk mail or junk phone calls that you have to deal with. But the truth is that sometimes we actually invite those distractions into our lives. How many times have you ever been in a conversation with a friend where you're having this really deep, important conversation, and all of a sudden you hear a beep, and they say, oh, excuse me for a minute, I gotta get out my phone and check this message. And your moment of quality time is lost. Those moments happen all the time. And get a load of this. There was a survey done recently, a national survey of smartphone users that asked people how often it's okay to pick up their phone. And not surprisingly, about half of people said it was okay to pick up their phone during dinner. About half the people, it's a little more surprising, said that they will pick up their phone in the bathroom. Get this, a third of people said it's okay to pick up their phone during sex. I think this is the moment in which I realized, okay, we have a problem. We've got to talk about this. There's something going on where we feel like we need to be needed, where it feels so good and so addictive that other people find our attention valuable that they need to constantly come after us. And there's a reason why we continue to feed into it. So what is that, and what is it doing to our emotional state? What I find happening from a positive psychology standpoint is that so often we are chasing after this emotional high that we are literally running ourselves off of what I call the happiness cliff. And the happiness cliff is that moment when you are surfing your Facebook feed and you're really enjoying connecting with your friends and your family members, seeing, oh, that cute kid just started school, and oh, this really important article just came out that I need to check in on. About 30 minutes in, you're still surfing, and you don't even know why. An hour and a half, there you are. And what happens is that we cross the point of what I call the point of diminishing return, which is that point at which we passed our maximum utility for using technology to increase our productivity, and then we went off the edge. So that point, actually, if you look at this graph, it's really interesting to me that the point of highest productivity comes before the peak of the curve. But the point at which people realize that they've fallen off the cliff is way on the other side of the curve. So what I want to do is to help you think through, how do I recognize, both in terms of emotion and through my physical body, how do I recognize that point of maximum productivity and then be able to train myself to stop before I fall off the cliff? And that's a skill set that I think that we are just now beginning to develop and emerge with, because these are challenges that we've never had to deal with before. We're in an area where we've never had boundaries that we had to create for this, and all of a sudden, we as a society are recognizing, okay, I think it might be time for some boundaries. I feel that, I just don't know what to do about it. So what I want to do is to bring you to positive psychology and some of the time-tested strategies and principles that we learned from the field that I think can be really, really helpful to understanding what's going on in your own mind and body and what you can do about it. So how many of you grew up in the 80s? Raise your hand if you grew up in the 80s. Okay, you might be familiar with this old ad that used to be part of the war on drugs. It said, this is your brain on drugs. This is my take on it. This is your brain on too much technology, where you literally have fried it by letting it sit on your computer for too long. So that's a mental image of what happens. I also like to use the analogy of a sunburn. A lot of people say, well, how long would you recommend that people should be on computers? Like the American Academy of Pediatrics now used to advise that children between the ages of 2 and 10 spend no more than 2 hours on computers a day. And over time, they've started to change that. Well, you know, if they're in school, that doesn't count, or if they're talking to family members, that doesn't count. What we're finding is there's a lot of gray area in there for what is acceptable for time on the computer. And not everybody hits the point of frying upon their computer at the same point. Just in the same way that some people sunburn at different rates. My skin is pretty fair. I know I sunburn pretty much every time I walk outside. So my husband has much darker skin, and he can handle a lot more sun. But what's happened over time is we've both learned our own bodies. We know that I have to use sunscreen. I know when I'm feeling burned and that it's time to deal with it. And my husband knows that he can just go outside and not even have to worry about it. Those biological symptoms become so crucial to shaping my behavior, changing what I'm doing with my preventative measures, as well as recognizing signs and symptoms. And so I think what we need to do is start recognizing, when does our egg start frying on the laptop? What is that point, and how do we get away from it when we hit that point? You might think, well, what's so bad about it? And I might fray around the edges a little bit now and then. I might even have to be on my computer for work, so I can't cut back on the amount of time I'm on the screen. Let me share with you the impact of distraction in our lives that's emerged in the past 10 years. In the year 2013, the National Information Center for Biotechnology reported that the human attention span has now dropped below that of a goldfish. out of a goldfish. A goldfish's attention span is 9 seconds, and the human attention span is now 8 seconds. Now just let that sink in for a moment. It's crazy. What that means for us, let me pause that for a second. Talk about distraction. What that means for us is that there's some really key information for us that we need to process about what that means when we get distracted. And so to show you what distraction does to our mind, I want to show you this 2-minute clip. It's really fun and entertaining, and it'll give you a snippet of an idea about what distraction does to us. So let me scoot back here and let you see this.
Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Right, okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. And what I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the 3 of diamonds.
The 3 of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table, do a little click of the fingers, and you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing colour-changing card trick. Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Right, okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. And what I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the 3 of diamonds.
The 3 of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table, do a little click of the fingers, and you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing colour-changing card trick.
Awesome. So this, for me, is such a great illustration of how our attention and our focus works. What we're finding is that if you pay attention to all the things that are distracting, your brain literally has no power left with which to process the things that are meaningful within your environment. So you're taught to, in this video, it cues you to focus on the cards, right? And you feel so tricked at the end, like, I can't believe it. Did anyone, by the way, see any of the color changes before I explained it? I heard a couple snickers, so I heard some people were getting it. So that's awesome, right? Like, the ability to see the bigger picture is so important because attention has everything to do with intention. And if you're not focusing on intention, you can't pay attention to the things around you. And so that is what mindful living is all about in the digital era. How do we get beyond the distractions so that we can focus in on what is really happening in the bigger picture? Or to put it in another way, one of the statistics that I came across in my research was that the average text message takes about 2.2 seconds to come into your phone. And that 2.2 seconds, what we see happen is that error rates get doubled. 2.2 seconds, you double your error rate on simple tasks like adding. If you have a text message that you send, which takes an average of 3.3 seconds, it triples your error rates. Now imagine the impact of that on your productivity. Get this, beyond that, every time you get distracted by your phone, it takes approximately 11 minutes to return to the focus on the task you were doing before. So that text message that's now doubled your error messages has now stolen 11 minutes of your productivity that you could have been doing other things with in your life. So how do we get over that? A lot of people will immediately turn to a digital detox. I feel so saturated with technology in my life, I just need to get away from it all for a little bit. Now that strategy is very effective if you want to simply detox, but what we found is that just like in diets, short-term diets ultimately fail because they are only short-term interventions. And I think what we need to do is begin to create patterns in our life for dealing with technology in a way that we can live alongside it that not only makes us happier while we're in the process, but will make us happier for the long run as well. Because just like the cavemen who discovered fire back in the day, right? They knew it was dangerous, but nobody once suggested, let's get rid of fire. I think fire is a really bad idea. It burned me the last time I touched it. No, you simply learn how to use the tool better so that you can then be able to take advantage of the power that comes with it. And that's my approach to technology. If we're able to begin to use this tool for its best and highest purposes, then we'll be able to capture the power for ourselves as opposed to getting burned. So the key here, we've got to figure out how do we stop using technology to zone out and how do we use it to start tuning in our life? Because I really sense that there's this bifurcation in the paths, that technology is either one or it's the other. There's no middle ground here. Either it's causing us to move away from our goals and our priorities, or it's helping us move closer to them. And so I have 5 strategies I want to share with you briefly today that'll give you some takeaways that you can just immediately put into action in your own life that are very simple, but I think are very eye-opening as well. And the first one is to know your stats. Now, the average smartphone user checks their phone 150 times a day. Now, you may think, well, I don't check my phone. There's no way. That's crazy talk. Maybe not. But if you did, the average smartphone user, if it took them 1 minute to pick up their phone, check the message, and put it back down, now, that's ignoring the 11 minutes of trying to get back to the task before that. So just assume 1 minute. That would be the equivalent of 2.5 hours of your day just picking up your phone, which is crazy. If you multiply that by the 12 months of the year, that's 38 days a year of your life that you're picking up your phone. Not even doing anything, just picking it up. So if you don't believe me, I have a great app that is worth checking out. It's called Realized. And Realized has been really insightful for me and generates a lot of aha moments for people I speak with as well. It's a free app. And what it does is it simply tracks your phone usage in the back of your phone. Now, your phone has ways that you can do this on your own, whether Android or iPhone. But what I like about Realized is it gives a lot more statistics behind your usage of your phone, including how many times you've picked it up, how much time you spent every time you picked it up, what apps you were on for the longest, what you were using, what your patterns are over time. And it was most eye-opening to me when I was doing research for my book. I'm going to be very transparent with you. This is my real data right here. This is my real data during Thanksgiving and my daughter's birthday. So the numbers by the little clocks there should be green if you're in the good zone. They're yellow if you're in a caution zone, and they're red if you're not doing well. Red was my daughter's birthday. That's 6 hours on the phone doing who knows what. Maybe I was videotaping to capture the moment. We'll just assume the best here. But what I think is interesting is that at no point did I actually dip below the 2.5 hours of pickups that were the average smartphone user for the day. My lowest amount of time is 2 hours and 37 minutes. So this was a really good litmus check for me to say, okay, I thought I was behaving one way. Now I know for a fact how I'm behaving, and I don't want to live like this. This is not who I want to be and how I want to spend my time. I actually have a lot of other things I want to be doing. And if you're like me, I have some great strategies. My colleague Alexa and I are going to be doing a workshop right after this to talk about digital time management and how we can rethink and reshape some of our behavior patterns to recapture that time in our lives and what that looks like on a very practical level. But that's the first step. You've got to know where you're at. You've got to get real, and you've got to create a baseline so you know where your behavior is and where you stack up with where you want to be. The second step is to tap into your third prong. Now, the third prong, just like an electrical outlet, has usually 2 prongs on it. If you add a third prong to the cord, you get a grounding wire that begins to channel and focus energy. And so I call this grounding wire your third prong to help you think about what it is in your life that are your set of guiding principles and beliefs that shape the way you think about your technology use. Maybe something you've never even contemplated before. If you're a parent, you've probably thought about it in terms of your children, like how you want your kids to be spending time with technology, but it took me some time to think through what does that mean for me and what I want to be doing. And one of the things that I came across for myself was that I'm in a place in my life where I really want to be growing. I want to be learning, and I want to invest a lot in my family. And so my set of principles and intentions all began to gather around that set of intentions, that third prong that shaped the rest of what I'm about to tell you. So some people who want to set their intentions have been able to come up with a lot of great hacks to make this a little bit easier. I have a great friend in Dallas whose name is Raj Daniels. He used to be CEO of a tech startup called OpenTime, and he once created this phone lock screen that I thought was pretty brilliant. And it was this simple idea that said, when he opened his phone, it would have a picture that said, am I moving closer or farther from my goals? So every time he picked up his phone for that 150 times, he would ask himself that question, farther or closer to my goals? And so I've developed a set of free lock screens that if you're interested in trying this out yourself, you can go and download any of them or create your own, whatever it might be. But the idea here is simply that you create something visual that makes you check yourself every single time you go to your phone. And I'm focusing on phones here. I know there's many other forms of technology, whether gaming systems or VR or computers, time for work. But I think for right now and where we're at in our society, phones are a big deal. They're our lives mushed together with work and play and learning, and we never escape them. And so I think it's really important for us to think through, if we're going to live our lives in some symbiosis with these devices, what does that look like, and are we going to check ourselves to make sure we're going where we want to go? Some of the intentions I've heard from other people I speak to is that my intention is to use my phone as a tool, not as an escape. Or my intention is to check my email only 3 times a day, because scientifically that's been proven to be more effective than checking constantly. My intention is to not turn on my phone at family dinner time. Or my intention is to look people in the eye rather than at my screen, particularly when I'm meeting with a friend for coffee or a colleague, that I'm not going to have my phone constantly looking at it while I'm having a conversation. I think each one of those is so important to shaping your behavior and the way you want to be. And we found through positive psychology that if you take a moment to write down your intentions, just for a second, it takes less than 2 minutes to write down what your intentions are, 42% more likely to actually stick with your positive behavior change than if you didn't. So write it down, write it huge, put it somewhere very prominent in your life that would really help you out to help you stick with your intentions. The fourth strategy is to simplify, simplify, simplify. Now we do this in our homes. There's constant decluttering and springtime cleaning, right? But oftentimes we don't take the time to clean out what I call our digital graveyard. And this is the items in our closets that I'm pretty sure everybody in this room has one. They're old videotapes, they're old game systems, there's cords and wires, you don't know what to do with them. They begin to creep up on you when you least expect it. You have no idea what to do with them. You know some of your old laptops that are broken, have sensitive data. What are you going to do with all this stuff? What I find is that if you keep this stuff around in your life, not only does it impact your happiness, but it begins to create an effect where the longer you hold an item, the harder it is to get rid of it later. In fact, trying to separate yourself from an item has the same effect in your brain as actually getting a cut or a wound. Excuse me. So when we're able to simplify, when we're able to really cut down to what's most important in our lives, that's what begins to create space for us to make way for future happiness, to bring in new technology that might begin to help us. And if you're looking for some really fun tech strategies for how to recycle, to upcycle, to reuse, or to get rid of items, I have a lot of strategies in my book, where I'd be happy to share with you as well, that can help you begin to deal with your digital graveyard. I think it's a really important topic that I'd like to start having the conversation around. And last, we need to establish invisible fences at home and at work. How many of you out there have a dog? Raise your hand. Oh, lots of you, yeah. So when I was in Virginia, I had a puppy, and we had a yard that didn't have a fence. Apparently, like for those of you who live in suburbia Texas, we all love fences, right? It's like the Container Store for backyards. Everybody has their own little square. But in Virginia, there were just these sprawling backyards, and people didn't put up fences. And I confess, that person who let their dog just run wild and chasing the mailman and the pregnant ladies in their strollers. And I didn't understand how everyone else's dogs were so well behaved until one day I discovered the invisible fence. And the invisible fence is a system that people started using where they put an underground wire under the grass, and they put a little collar around their dog's neck. And what would happen is if the dog crossed the line where the wire was, it would give them a gentle vibration or shock, and they'd learn over time that they shouldn't cross that line. Well, what was interesting to me, though, was that the invisible fence company said that 80% of people who have invisible fences don't have them turned on, which is crazy, right? What happens is your dog learns where the boundary is, and they just never cross it again. This is my vision for what we might become as a society for ourselves and technology. We didn't have boundaries 10 years ago. Now we're beginning to create boundaries, and we're trying to figure out, where do I put that boundary? What should the boundaries look like? How much shocking do I need to stop this behavior? And then how do I stick with it? But the idea would be that if we can train ourselves now with appropriate boundaries, that later on down the line, we won't have to have so many shocks or so many burns from being overexposed, overused. In particular, I find this very important for children. Those of you who have children or have nieces and nephews, that a number of young people are stumbling on websites that, as we all know, are out there that we don't want them to have access to at this age. I happen to have a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old, and I was testing out a new device recently called Kids Wi-Fi, and I kid you not, literally 5 days after I installed this, my daughter, who's 10 years old, she's a fashionista. She loves looking up things on YouTube for fashion. She came running to me and she's like, "Mom, the internet's broken." I said, "Sweetie, what were you looking up?" And she said, "Well, I was just looking up cute girl short skirt and the internet wouldn't work." So, thank goodness I just tested out this device, because who knows what she would have seen. I guarantee it wasn't going to be what she was hoping for. But that for me was an amazing beginning step at an invisible fence. I wasn't there. I can't catch all the moments when she might have searched for things that I don't want her to be searching for. But I'm beginning to use technology as fire to fight fire, so that I've got boundaries around that keep us not only safe but also happier, healthier for the long run. And that was a really important one. Another boundary that I've heard a lot of people say is that they've just learned when and where to have their phone within their presence. A research study I came across last year said that the mere presence of a cell phone in your line of sight while you're working decreases your focus, your productivity, and your effectiveness. Now that's if you don't even look at it or touch it, which is crazy, right? You would think that maybe if you're picking it up constantly that would happen, but this is if you don't even look at it. Just the mere presence of it in your line of sight makes you less productive, less focused, less effective. And so the simple tweak, the simple invisible boundary here, is simply to hide your phone while you're trying to focus. It means putting it behind your laptop screen. It means putting it in your bag, or if you have nowhere else, just stick it in your back pocket so that you don't have it in your line of sight. It's the simplest invisible boundary that I know of, but the most effective, because we know scientifically now that this is something that affects our brain, and it is shaping our behavior as we speak. So try it out. I encourage you to try it, to share it, and I'd love to hear your stories about how that goes for you as well. So we've talked a little bit about how technology can keep us away from things that are causing us to zone out, but how do we use technology to help us tune into ourselves better? Because this is a whole new frontier that I think is so fascinating. It's amazing that we're living in this time, in this space in our world, where we're beginning to see the cognitive revolution collide with the technological revolution. I love this picture. This is actually a picture of my dad, who is a neuroscientist at Baylor University. And this was a photo of him back from the 1970s. He was considered quite avant-garde for having living brains in his office for years, and everyone was totally grossed out by these brains and formaldehyde. But he was fascinated with looking at the human brain, because at that point, nobody had ever been able to hold a brain. And that was really cool. Now, we're in the technicolor world where we're not only able to hold the brain, but we're actually able to manipulate it, to see it, to track it, to study it, to see what's going on when our brains are firing. And for me, that begins to help us peel back the layers of our brain and mind to begin to create behavior change where we know there's certain things we can do that will change our outcomes, that'll make us happier and more successful and more effective and more focused. And so this is where I think technology becomes the most helpful for moving us into the future of happiness. Now, to show you exactly how important this is and how this works, this is where I want to do an experiment with you that I am really looking forward to. So nobody is required to do this experiment. I'm no longer allowed to bring consent forms to my talks anymore after that last electric shock therapy snafu. So this is totally up to you if you want to participate. But if you do, I need you to move around a little bit, and everybody needs to find a partner. So I'm going to give you a minute. Everyone find a partner. If you need one, raise your hand, and I'll partner you up with someone in the room. But find someone you can do the experiment with. How many of you, raise your hand if you have a background in psychology? Anybody in here? Couple, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, great. So for those of you with a background in psychology, this is what I call the emotional prime. And for everybody else, this is nothing. Don't worry about it. So for the last several years of your life, the last decade of your life, you've been developing your self-control and discipline. It's why you are as effective as you are here today. And so what I want you to do for this experiment is to use all of your self-control and your discipline for just 7 seconds. And at 8 seconds, you can do whatever you want to or with your partner, but 7 seconds, I need your attention, okay? So person number one, first of all, I need to tell you who person number one is. So if you're sitting closest to this wall, you're going to be person number one. And if you're sitting closer to this wall, you're person number two. So person number one, raise your hand. Person number two. Great. That was not the experiment. That was just the setup. I did this experiment on Wall Street a few months ago, and it literally took them like 5 minutes to figure out who number one was. So I always just verify now who number 1 and 2 is. It's not a statement about who you are. But person number one, what I want you to do is turn and get within striking distance of person number 2. Person number 2, I don't want you to move to defend yourself from bodily harm. Don't flinch, don't move your face, just sit there and take it, okay? You ready? Okay, person number 2, I want you to look at person number 1 in the eyes, and person number 1, your job, person number 2 first. Person number 2, your job is to keep your face as still as possible, showing no fear, no flinching, no frustration, okay? Person number 1, your job is to look into the eyes of person number 2 as deeply, warmly, and genuinely as you can, and smile the biggest smile you've ever had. You're trying to get the other person to smile. All right? Go. Bingo. Ooh. Okay, hold it. Person number 2, what happened? That was horrible. I mean, you held out for longer than anybody, but you eventually broke, right? What I'd like to do is try this again. I want to see if the other person can retaliate. So person number 1, let's see if you can keep your face straight for 7 seconds. Person number 2, your job is to look them up into their eyes as warmly, deeply, and genuinely as possible. Go. I think that was maybe worse than before. How many of you failed miserably at this experiment? Yeah, I thought so. How many of you successfully did what I asked you to do? 1, really, Nick? Wow. 2, 3, 4.
Cold-hearted.
Wow. The truth comes out. What's so interesting for me about this experiment is it shows to me how the human brain is wirelessly connected to each other. How one person could smile at another person, and even though they're actively resisting you, is still able to create an emotional connection there, which is amazing, right? How many of you either felt your own lip or you saw your partner's lips start to quiver during this experiment? Raise your hand. Okay, that's weird, but totally expected. what's happening there, and this is phenomenal to me, is that your motor neurons are fighting against your mirror neurons. So your muscles in your face are fighting against your brain, literally trying to stop you from smiling, and they begin to quiver because they're at war with each other. And you see it in just 7 seconds begin to take place. This is what's happening in the human mind as we begin to connect our minds together in a room. What we're finding is that positivity and negativity within a room can go from one side of the room to the other in under 2 minutes. Or if you're at an airport gate and you really want to try an experiment to mess with people, don't tell anyone I told you to do this or to try it, but there was once a research study done where there was a research confederate placed at an airplane gate. And the research confederate had about 15 people standing around him. And all he did for 2 minutes was look at his watch repeatedly, bounce up and down, and occasionally do the sigh. And what began to happen in under 2 minutes was that 11 of those 15 people began to copy the exact same behavior. We begin to mirror each other through a room, whether it's positive or negative, because we're emotionally connected to each other. And this, to me, changes how and why it's so important for us to begin to shape the way that we interact with technology, with each other, with the wires, whether wireless or not wired. The ways that we interact as a species and as humans begins to shape the way that we begin to create the future of happiness, because it changes both our emotional awareness of each other as well as shaping how we begin to create emotion, affect within the community. Next week I'm going to get to go to MIT, and they're doing this amazing Emotion Awareness Summit looking at technologies that will begin to use the camera on your phone or your laptop to study your facial recognition, telling you through 11,000 valence points on your face about whether you're feeling joy or sadness or frustration. But what they're using that for is to begin to create an emotional connection with technology that says, imagine if you were sitting at your office desk and you could say, you've been sitting at your desk for so long now and your face is really beginning to show frustration or stress or anger. Why don't you take a break now? At which point you might want to hit your computer. But I think that kind of sensitivity and thoughtfulness to begin to tie in emotion and humanity into our technology is going to be where the future and the frontier of happiness is moving towards. And I'm really excited to see how do we shape that through active conversation. And additionally, we can begin to use technology to train our brains for greater awareness and happiness. The idea of being able to peel back the layers of our mind comes right back to tracking our own behavior through life logging or simple things like Fitbit. I love my Fitbit because it helps me track over time not only my eating, my health, my sleep, but this is just the beginning of the frontier. As many of you know, health trackers are just the most commercialized at this point, but there's a number of amazing gadgets and apps and devices I've had the opportunity to try over the last couple years. For the course of my book, I wound up trying out 400 different apps and gadgets and devices, and I literally had my skin pricked for blood testers, and I've had my body vibrated from shock therapy that was gone awry. I've had Velcro adhesive rip off part of my skin for a posture trainer. So I've literally got my skin in the game at this point. And I find that what's so amazing is that despite the fact that there are so many misfired technologies, there's some really phenomenal ones that are beginning to create change in behavior. Whether it's Happify that trains your brain for greater happiness through simple little games that are free online, or it's apps and gadgets like the Spire, which helps you to track your breathing patterns. These are the beginning places for beginning to think about emotional awareness. And I put up here a website if you're curious. I've got another 40 of my favorite apps, gadgets, and devices that I've personally tested out now that I find to be particularly effective for training the brain for greater happiness or well-being. That it's at amyblankson.com/tech. And I think they're fascinating. If you know of others, I'd like to learn more. So feel free to share with me after this talk because I'm curious. But I mentioned this Firestone. This is one of the gadgets that I tried out last summer. And it went from just a fascinating gadget wearable to fundamentally transformative for me. Of all the gadgets and wearables, this is probably the one that I've stuck with the longest. And the reason why it became so important to me was that my 10-year-old daughter, she was 9 last summer, through a series of unfortunate incidents, she wound up breaking her neck last summer in our pool. Unfortunately, she's fine now. She's back to doing back handsprings and flips all over the place. But at the time that this took place, it was a dramatic moment for our family. And I had the privilege of being the one to drive her to the hospital to meet with the doctors and get fitted for this neck brace. And what was interesting was that it was the time I was testing this Firestone. And so all the way to the hospital, this Firestone showed that I had been completely calm. It was perhaps that like mother instinct calm where you're thinking like, okay, this is go time, I've just got to take care of stuff. But it wasn't until after we were leaving the hospital that the Firestone started to vibrate, and I sent a message to my phone and said, Amy, you're feeling tense. I know. But in that moment of recognition, it made me think about why I was feeling tense. And what I realized was that I was feeling tense, that other people in the hospital were looking at me and wondering what kind of mother I was, that my daughter's neck was broken. And that was the dominant thought in my mind, but I recognized that that's not who I wanted to be. I wanted to be the mother who was there for her daughter, contemplating her summer of having to wear this neck brace and what people were going to think of her and what activities she wouldn't be able to do and how hot and sticky it was going to be in Texas with this neck brace on and yada, yada, yada. And I think that that moment of self-recognition helped me to mindfully pivot in about 30 seconds to be the person I wanted to be. I could recognize I was feeling tense, could understand why I was feeling tense, and I could change my behavior. And for me, this is technology at its finest, beginning to raise our consciousness to create lifestyle and behavior change so that we can be who we want to be. And that, my friends, is happiness. That, to me, is the beginning of creating a path in which we can create change that we can create together, that we can create something that we can make a difference in the way that we become aware as a humanity, as a group of humans, to create that ripple effect, the mirror neuron effect in our brains where we see change happen. I think if we do nothing in the future, we're perhaps on a trajectory where we're heading towards a future where everybody sits at the dinner table staring at their devices and not interacting. If you're like me, I don't want that to be the end of our story. I think that we're just at a crossroads right now, and we're able to begin to move through that to something better and more powerful if we use technology for the best and highest purposes. And I bring this slide to you because you guys are the innovators, right? Google is at the top of the food chain for creating innovation and positive change. And so I want to encourage you not only to innovate, but to think specifically about well-being. We're not just about creating smart cities these days. We want smart and happy cities. We don't just want smart schools. We want smart and happy schools. So how do we use innovation to feed and funnel more change to create and continue to think about our humanity and our connectedness and how we're wirelessly connected to each other? And I'll conclude with this. I think that while sometimes people think, well, I'm just not an engineer. Like, you know, I might work at Google, but I'm not one of the people who creates the gadgets and devices or the new game changers in the field. And what I want to encourage you is that each one of us are innovators in our own space and field. These days, all it takes is one person with an idea to begin to create positive change. It takes the idea to collaborate and be willing to put yourself out there to bring people together around an idea. And this story for me is powerful. I read this about this organization called Enabling Our Future, and it's an organization that's a global alliance of volunteers around the world who build 3D printed prosthetic hands for children in need. So instead of spending $200,000 on a prosthetic arm, now kids can get one for $30 printed at their local library. And so I told a friend in my neighborhood who has a daughter who was born with some brachydactyly. This little girl is 7 years old, just like my daughter is 7, and she loves gymnastics. And up until this point in her life, it's never stopped her from doing monkey bars or cartwheels with the best of them. But as she's getting older, her body's getting heavier, and she found on the monkey bars, she was starting to get painful blisters from trying to grab the bars in unusual ways. And so I told her mom, you've got to check out this organization. It's kind of fascinating. Maybe it could help her grip this gymnastics bar a little bit better. Well, 1 week later, I get this phone call. She said, Amy, you got to come over here. And I said, okay, I'm coming. What's going on? And she said, well, my husband and I checked out that website you told us about, Enabling Our Future. And my husband spent the entire weekend at the Frisco Library. He printed a hand for his daughter, for our daughter, and I wanted you to be here to see her use it for the first time. Oh, it was amazing. I get goosebumps every time I think about it, because it was the story of one website that led one father to go find a resource, to find a 3D printer, to begin to create a change for his daughter's life that is a story I can now tell to share with you, to go to find other people, to find resources to do similar things. And it's the story that grows and changes with time as we begin to see that technology is a magnifier, right? That website was magnified into community change. And these things that we do in our lives, these ideas and innovations we come up with, are up to us to change and decide, are we going to let technology distract us, or are we going to tune into ourselves and use technology for its best and highest purposes? So I encourage it, and I leave you guys with this torch and mantle to think about, what does this mean for you? What would it mean to create the next innovation, whether in your own personal life through setting your intentions, or beginning to change the way that you use your phone, or beginning to think through an idea and build a collaboration around something that brings more humanity to the way that we interact together. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you, and I wish you the best as you go out there and create great change for the world. Thank you.